Good day, class. I am Teacher Mads, Teacher Yan. I am Teacher Wendy. I am Teacher Ara. I am Teacher Lori.
And I am Teacher Joey.
We are the Group 1 and today we are going to discuss about gender and religion. Gender and religion. So let's start first with the definition. When we say gender, it is a socially learned behavior usually associated with one sex. While religion, on the other hand, it pertains to beliefs and worships of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or goddess. So, learning objectives. At the end of the discussion, the students should be able to scrutinize the historical gendering of religion, and the last one is to discuss the theologies of differences and inequalities. So let's start our formal discussion with the historical gendering of religion. In pre-modern societies, goddesses proliferated. So if you can still remember the different Greek gods and goddesses, people from the primitive society used to worship them. There is a goddess of fertility, reproduction, goddess war, goddess of wisdom and health, god for plentiful harvest, and many more. So, many of the great historical anthropologists of the 19th and early 20th centuries proposed that primitive matriarchies and polytheistic cultures were gradually replaced either by conquest or contact. So when we say primitive matriarchies, it is a type of a primitive society in which women have most of the authority and power. Polytheistic cultures are polytheism, so it pertains to the beliefs in many gods. So Maria de Butas, he was a professor of archaeology, and he argued that a goddess-oriented civilization was characterized by peace, harmony, and a nurturing society, but was later destroyed by the Russian conquest. So, there are thousands of gods and goddesses who have occupied the pantheon of deities throughout the world history. Anthropologist Peggy Reed Sunday traces the origins of male dominance in Europe and the Middle East to the triumph of the sky gods over earth goddesses. The triumph of the invisible and all-powerful over the more visible, immediate, and pragmatic. So, yet many cultures today continue to worship goddesses with significant crossovers. So, we have here some examples. So the first one is animist religions like the Yoruba in Africa have influenced religious cult tradition in the Western Hemisphere such as Voodoo and Santeria. So these traditions maintains women's spiritual power in Africa. So the second is Greek and Roman mythology paired up gods and goddesses, and while Zeus thundered angrily, goddesses like Athena and Hera were proved able problem solvers. So as we all know that goddess Athena is the goddess of wisdom and health. So the next one is Mesopotamians worship Ishtar. Ishtar is a goddess of war and sexual love in Mesopotamian religion. So Isis and Demeter were goddesses of law and justice in Egypt and Greece, respectively. The next one is that ancient culture in the Near East and Middle East routinely included fertility goddesses who controlled life forces such as birth and death. Some cultures even developed matriarchal religions in which the Great Mother was the source of life.
And next, many contemporary non-industrial cultures have been less tainted by incorporation into Western networks. This means that in the past years, there are still cultures who are not influenced and affected by any Western networks, still maintain such female deities, suggesting seeing female as both equal and divine answers some important cultural needs across historical time. And Hinduism holds that there are many gods and goddesses, and Buddhists don't believe in any titular god who stands above, but rather in the godlike potential of all humans. Among those religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, which is older than Judaism, there is far more spiritual diversity. So it means that their belief is more diverse. And monotheism, which is a belief that there is only one God, changed all that. There has never been much of a question that the single unitary God who first spoke to Abraham was a male God. But we all know that God has had many personalities: merciful, vengeful, paternal helper, or angry judge, patient and paternal, or proud and patriarchal. But ever since Abraham heard that voice has been male. And the monotheistic assertion of a male God and the normative code that demanded that women be subordinate to men had practical historical implications. So in the past, monotheistic religions asserts that God is a male, and God as the highest supernatural being who is male. With that, they normalized that men will be superior to women. And it meant not only elevating men over women, but it meant stamping out and suppressing all those other religious traditions that posited either the equality of women, celebrated women's reproductive power as divine, or envisioned women as goddesses. Some scholars argue that as these goddesses' traditions were suppressed, they went underground and re-emerged as witchcraft. So the word witch in witchcraft means wise one, and witches were often healers, ritually in charge of medicine, and midwives who were in charge of birth. So these were the powerful women, often independent of the role of men. As Carol Price writes, the wise woman was summoned at the crisis of the life cycle before the priest. She delivered the baby, while the priest was called later to perform the baptism. She was first called upon to cure illness or treat the dying, while the priest was called in after other remedies had failed. To administer the last rites, it is not difficult to see why she was persecuted by an insecure, misogynist church which could not tolerate rival power.
Next, we are going to tackle about the theologies of differences, theologies of inequality. Not only when it comes to the gender of God, but in so many areas, the Bible and other canonical texts are normative, prescribing the appropriate relationship between men and women, husband and wives, parents and children. So the theologies of differences and theologies of inequality presents evidences that not only in the gender of God there is differences in inequality, but even in the other canonical texts in the Holy Book of the Christians, which is the Bible, prescribing what is the appropriate relationship between men and women, husband and wives, and parents and children. It seems that even in the sacred scriptures also emphasizes inequality. The big gap between men and women, it emphasizes that women should submit and be dependent to men because they hold the power and strength to provide their daily needs. Next, it is estimated that 4/5 of the Quran is concerned with prescribing the appropriate relationships between women and men. So before we proceed, let me explain first what is Quran. If some of you are wondering what is Quran. Quran is the holy book of Islam which was written by Prophet Muhammad. It is similar to the Bible which also teaches many things about morality and spiritual values that guides the people to live in this world following the will of their God, which is Allah. So the Bible, both the New and Old Testaments, are also preoccupied with regulating and adjudicating domestic relationships. Sacred texts and their prophets are far more ambiguous than their subsequent male interpreters have indicated. So here are the examples why it is described that the prophets and texts are more ambiguous than the male interpreters. So first, Jesus seemed equally concerned with women as with men and made it a point to single out some women who were scorned by others for special devotion rather. According to theologian Leonard Swidler, Jesus neither said nor did anything which would indicate that he advocated treating women as intrinsically inferior to men, but on the contrary, he said and did things which indicated he thought of women as the equals of men. And the second one, Muhammad insisted that women's consent had to be obtained before marriage, a startling reform at the time. Women were also subject to the same requirements for prayer and fasting during the holy month of Ramadan. At the same time, men were permitted to have up to 4 wives, and women were subservient rather to men because men were a degree above women because God has made one to excel over the other. So even the Quran or Prophet Muhammad emphasized the inequality between men and women, that men is more above than the women.
Religious imperative for gender inequality seems to have been most firmly instituted in the commentaries of the canonical text. It is talking about how religious beliefs have been used to justify treating men and women differently. This idea seems to come from the way people interpret certain important religious texts, which can be confusing or unclear on the topics of gender equality. Because of this confusing, some people have decided that it is okay for men and women to be treated differently based on their gender. The text gives example of this happening in different religions that doesn't go in a lot of detail about what those examples are specifically. So here's the example. Let the wives be subject to their husbands as to the Lord, because a husband is head of the wife, just as Christ is head of the church. But just as the church is subject to the Christ, so let wives also be subject in everything to their husbands. This is talking about the relationship between husband and wives, specifically in Christian marriage. It says that wives should be the submissive to their husband just as they are to the Christ or God. Because they said that husband is like the head of the wives. The head of every man is Christ, and the head of woman is her husband. This means that just as Christ in a change of the church, so too should a husband be in charge of his wife. The second quote from Corinthians reinforces that this idea by saying a man's head is Christ and woman's head is their husband. In 1998, in the wake of several decades of intense feminist campaigns, the Southern Baptist Convention amended its official statements of belief to insist that a wife should submit graciously to their husband and has shown her God-given responsibility to respect her husband and to serve as his helper. Way back in 1998, there was controversy over this belief. Within one particular religious group to the Southern Baptist Convention, they changed their official statement to say that women should submit graciously to their husbands and respect them as helpers. These conflicts over show how to interpret sacred texts often spills over into secular policies and political debates. Such conflicts over the interpretations of sacred texts may be at their heart doctrinal, but they are often expressed as secular policies. Doctrinal conflicts also inform the framing of political debates. Examples, in the 19th century, it was the Protestant clergy that led the charge against women's rights, whether the right to vote, go to college, or enter professions such as medicine or law. Many Protestant ministers were among the most fervent supporters of women's suffrage. Rev. Samuel B. May's 1846 sermon, The Rights and Condition of Woman, argued that this enfranchisement of women is as unjust as the disenfranchisement of the males would be. For there is nothing in their moral, mental, or physical nature that disqualifies them to understand correctly the interests of the community or to act wisely on reference to them. In some of the world's largest Muslim countries, like Indonesia, women wear Western clothing and are engaged in every profession. Girls go to school unconstrained, and women and men are equally emphasized. An example given from history shows how Protestant clergy were against women's rights, such as voting or going to college during the 19th century. But then some ministers later supported women's suffrage. In contrast, Muslim countries like Indonesia have more gender equality, with women wearing Western clothing and having access to education and profession. Overall, the test discussed different interpretation of religious belief regarding marriage rules for men and women, which can influence societal attitudes towards gender equality.
In most religions, gender inequality is enshrined and enforced through a politicization of the body. All the monotheistic religions prescribe some bodily practices and prescribe others. So, monotheistic religions such as Christianity, Islam, and Judaism often prescribe specific bodily practices such as dress codes, dietary restrictions, and rituals like circumcision. These practices are typically influenced by religious beliefs and teachings. At the same time, these religions also prohibited certain behaviors or practices which may vary based on gender. Then, the enforcement of these bodily practices and prohibitions can contribute to gender inequality within religious communities. For example, certain practices or restrictions may be more heavily imposed on one gender than the other, leading to a disparity in how individuals of different genders are treated within the religious context. Examples: Christian men are not supposed to cover their heads, but Christian women are required. As Paul explained to the Corinthians 11, verse 7 to 9, said that a man indeed ought not to cover his head, because he is the image and glory of God. But woman is the glory of man. For man is not from woman, but woman from man. For man was not created for woman, but woman for man. Paul states that a man should not cover his head because he is the image and the glory of God. This is believed to reflect the idea that men, as a representatives of God, should not cover their heads as a sign of respect and honor towards God. On the other hand, Paul mentions that woman is the glory of man and that woman was created for man. This has been interpreted by some as implying a hierarchy or order of creation where man is seen as the head or leader and woman as a supportive role. The requirement for women to cover their heads in some Christian traditions is based on this passage, with the belief that it symbolizes the submission of women to male authority. Next example, in some more fundamentalist Islamic societies, women's bodies are to be completely concealed at all times. Even if she must venture out in public in the first place, she must remain hidden under a chador. They may show no part of their body nor face in the public. Men's bodies are also polished. Since the Prophet wore a beard, Muslim men, these moral enforcers believe, are required to wear a beard. This example highlights the strict dress codes and societal norms present in some Islamic societies regarding the attire of women and men. In these societies, women are expected to completely conceal their body at all times, with the requirement to wear a chador if they need to go out in the public. This conservative approach dictates that women should not show any part of their body or face in the public. It emphasized the modesty and the protection of the female modesty. And also, men's appearance also regulated, with a specific focus on facial hair, in line with the belief that the Prophet Muhammad wore a beard. Some moral enforcers in the societies insist that Muslim men are obligated to wear a beard as well. It symbolized a manliness and a power. This practice is seen as a religious and cultural symbol of adherence to tradition and the emulation of the Prophet's example. Last example is one of the hallmarks of women's second-class status among Orthodox Jews has always been in the ritual cleansing. Menstruation makes women ritually unclean. For 12 days a month, women are considered unclean. Anything she touches becomes impure, and she must be physically segregated from men. 7 days after the menstrual cycle ends, she goes a ritual bath called mikvah, where she is purified and thus able to rejoin as a social life. The practice within Orthodox Judaism that is centered around ritual purity and cleanliness related to menstruation. In Orthodox Jewish tradition, menstruating women are considered ritually unclean for a specific period, typically around 12 days a month. During this time, anything they touch view as impure, and they are required to be physically segregated from men. The practice of ritual cleansing, such as going to mikvah, which is a ritual bath, plays a significant role in the process of purification for women after their menstruation cycle. After the completion of this period, which is typically 7 days after menstruation ends, women go to mikvah to be purified. This act of immersion in the mikvah is believed to restore their ritual purity, allowing them to rejoin social life and communal activities.
Next, it is the body and its pleasures that especially elicits religious passion. All religions require the suppression of sex for the glory of God. So these are the interpretation. The first one is, among Orthodox Jews, women and men are both entitled, indeed encouraged, to experience sexual fulfillment in marriage. It simply explains that sex is only for a married couple, and it serves as fulfillment in marriage. We all know that sex is not for a couple that's not married, but only for a married couple, as it is a gift for them. Next, the second interpretation is, Christianity emphasized the strict repression of sexuality. Sex was to be avoided and engaged in only for procreation. According to St. Augustine, sex was the vehicle by which original sin was transmitted from one generation to the next. Celibacy is the one who is not married.
Celibacy was promoted as a higher moral and spiritual position. Lust is listed as among the 7 deadly sins, and women are the repositories of lust. So as in Christianity, sex before marriage is a sin which called fornication, and it should really be avoided. Lust is a deadly sin because lust is the one that pushes someone to do things immoral and not in the right time. And as for my own perspective, you can be driven by lust as if you hasn't encountered the love of God. Next, let's read what a young man in Lubbock, Texas said. He said that life in Lubbock, Texas taught me 2 things. One is that God loves you and you're going to hell. The other is that sex is the most awful, filthy thing on earth and you should save it for someone you love. The first one is this young man may be witness immorality in Lubbock, Texas. As it said there that God loves you and you're going to hell. Yes, indeed, God really loves you so much. And you're going to hell unless you follow the will of God. God is a merciful God. He gives many chances for us. Second, sex is surely for unmarried couples. Only that it is said there that it should be reserved for someone you love. And the last, generally, that someone you love has to be someone of a gender different from yours. In short, that female is for a male and male is for female. Another of religion's hallmark elements of maintaining gender difference is to require people to love only those a different gender. Many religions either discourage or prohibited homosexuality, as homosexuality is an immoral in a Bible. And this is particularly true of monotheistic religions, or they believe in only one God. That's the end of our discussion. Thank you and God bless.